The Phantom Treehouse, a lost Australian animated film you may never have heard of. Picture this, it's 1984, somewhere in Australia, and a tiny film company with a dream, a handful of animators, and not much money is making an animated fantasy film. There are pirates, magical lands, a boy and his dog, a creature from Aboriginal folklore, and a villain whose son is called Snivelpuss. That film gets made, gets released, and then, almost without a trace, it disappears. No big studio, no wide release, no Netflix special, no legacy. Just a quiet, colourful little film slowly fading into the background of Australian cinema history. That film is A Phantom Treehouse, and today we're going to dig it back up. The Phantom Treehouse was written, directed, produced and partly animated by one man, Paul Williams. Not the famous American songwriter, but an Australian filmmaker who clearly had a very big imagination and a very small budget to work with. The film was made by Fable Films in partnership with Phantom Treehouse Limited, and the entire animation team consisted of just 5 people. Steve French, Maggie Gedders, Gus McLaurin, Steve Robinson and Williams himself all worked on bringing the visuals to life. The music and lyrics were written by Kevin Hotkin, giving the film its own distinct sound. The voice cast included Brian Hannon, B.T. Harrison, Jason Soul, Ross Williams, Cal-Ann Haylett, Terry Gill, Debbie Cumming and Hamish Hughes. These are not names that will ring many bells today, but they gave their best to bring a project that deserves far more attention than it received. When you consider that major animated films of the same era were being made by teams of hundreds if not thousands, what this small group pulled off is actually pretty impressive. The story begins simple enough. Young Tom notices that Lucy, the girl next door, has gone missing. He grabs his dog Rags and heads off to find her. Following her trail through the woods, he comes across a treehouse. He steps inside, falls through a trapdoor, and lands somewhere he definitely did not expect. He is in a magical land, a strange and colourful world that plays by its own rules, and Lucy is already in serious danger. She's been snatched by the film's villain, a pirate who goes by the magnificent name of Black Jack McGregor. Now Black Jack has got into his head that Lucy is actually Princess Diana of the nearby Bongo Island. She isn't. She's very much just Lucy from next door. But Black Jack is not the sort of man who lets facts get in the way of a good plan. His plan, specifically, is to marry Lucy off to his son. His son is called Snivelpuss. That name alone should tell you everything you need to know about the kind of film this is. Tom is not the sort of boy who gives up on a friend, even when he's stuck in a magical land full of pirates. He sets out to rescue Lucy, and on the way he picks up 2 very useful allies. The first is a bunyip. For those who are not familiar, the bunyip is a creature from Australian Aboriginal folklore. Descriptions of it vary wildly. Sometimes it's a large swamp beast, sometimes something far stranger, but it has been part of Australian storytelling for a very long time. In the Phantom Treehouse, the bunyip is less of a monster and more of a reluctant hero. It has very good reason to help Tom, because Black Jack has been trying to turn it into bunyip stew, and nothing motivates a creature quite like the threat of becoming someone's dinner. The second ally is Professor Crankwhistle, an eccentric inventor with a head full of wild ideas and gadgets to match. Now he's the kind of character who charges headfirst into situations that would send sensible people running in the opposite direction. Together, this little team of a boy, a dog, a folklore creature and a slightly unhinged inventor take on a pirate and his unfortunate name Some. It is, on paper, a completely ridiculous plan. But then, the best adventures usually are. On the surface, the Phantom Treehouse follows a familiar formula. Ordinary children stumble into an extraordinary world, face a larger-than-life villain, and find their way home. It is the kind of story that has been told hundreds of times in dozens of different ways. But the Phantom Treehouse has something that most of those stories don't. It feels genuinely, proudly Australian. The Bunyip is not just a quirky sidekick thrown in for fun. It is a creature pulled from the country's own deep well of folklore, given a hero's role in the story. The humour is warm and unpretentious. The villains are over the top in exactly the right way, and the whole thing has a rough around the edges charm that big budget productions rarely manage to pull off, because they are usually too polished to feel this alive. It was not trying to be Disney. It was not trying to impress anyone in Hollywood. It was just a group of people in Australia making the film they wanted to make, with the resources they had, and doing it with a lot of heart. So, why did it disappear? Given all that, it's fair to ask why the Phantom Treehouse is not better known. The honest answer is that the odds were stacked against it from the start. It had no major studio distribution, no marketing budget to speak of, and no international connections to push it into cinemas beyond Australia. The 1980s were a competitive time for animation. The big American studios were producing glossy, heavily promoted films that dominated screens around the world. A small Australian production made by 5 animators simply did not have the firepower to compete with that. It found a limited audience, played in a small number of venues, and then quietly faded from view. Over the years, it became the kind of film that only surfaces in old books about Australian cinema, mentioned briefly, discussed rarely, and almost impossible to find. Today, footage of the film is extremely scarce online. There is no DVD release, no streaming platform, no restoration project keeping it alive. There are some VHS tapes that rarely do come online. It exists in a strange limbo. Too recent to be ancient history, too obscure to be remembered. In a way, the Phantom Treehouse has become just as mysterious as the treehouse at the centre of its story. You hear about it, you try to find it, and it keeps slipping just out of reach. The Phantom Treehouse is a film that should have had a longer life than it did. A boy, a dog, a magical land, a pirate with delusions of grandeur, a son called Snivelpuss, a bunyip who just wanted to avoid becoming dinner, and a mad inventor with too many gadgets. It is charming, odd, and completely sincere. The kind of film that would only have come from a small team of people who genuinely believed in what they were making. Films like this deserve to be remembered. Not because they are perfect, but because they are real, made with care, made with creativity, and made with a spirit that no amount of money can buy.